I hope a yummy, nutritious lunch after some real food, now some food for thought. But make no mistake, this is not dessert after lunch. For many, this is the main course of this two-day conference, so to speak. I hope it'll be very digestible. The premiere of the Futures Forum here, Germany's and America's #1 top-notch diplomats here on stage and available for questions later on in the hour, so rare opportunity for all of us. I'm particularly tickled, as they say, excited to be hosting this, because I've had the privilege of interviewing Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock on numerous occasions. I've had the privilege of interviewing Secretary of State Antony Blinken before, but I've never had the opportunity to interview them both at the same time on stage. And of course, there are numerous, especially in times like these, opportunities and fields we would like to cover. But this is our topic today, the future of democracy in a digital world. This debate within the hour will be circling around. But before we dive right into it and try to cover as many questions as possible in this meeting here, we produced a little clip to give you an idea what has happened so far on the first day of this premiere.
As an American living and working in Berlin on digital democracy, I'm really interested in questions of disinformation online, hate speech online, and how that threatens our democratic framework.
Where we often thought about the negotiations not far from here in the Friedenssaal that the G7 foreign ministers will meet in tomorrow, that laid the cornerstone of nation-state sovereignty and of the diplomacy that we use today to cement the transatlantic relationship.
Democracies are rooted in this idea that the truth will out. Now, we have to fight for that.
But we felt we needed a shift of focus because it seemed to us that these mega challenges, in particular technologies, digitization, disruptive technologies, they will alter our lives.
So we discussed a lot of topics, but we agreed that one topic is at the core of our solution, and it's a topic of interoperability. What does it mean? It means that software systems inside governments and between governments can talk to each other and exchange data. And we agreed that Germany, the EU, and the US should found a standardization body to ensure interoperability in all the software vendors and the landscape in Europe and their allied partners.
So the essence of our workshop's recommendations all centered around the need for democracies that have committed to protect and advance human rights online need to make sure that their own domestic and foreign policies are actually doing just that.
Our working group was countering authoritarianism and looking at misuse of technology. So we looked at several ideas. One was platform accountability, and another was reducing the export of technologies used to promote internet controls and other types of problems.
We focused on developing countries, mainly on how norms and standards are set. And one of the ideas was to allocate funds to countries specifically in the global south, who can then come up with their own policy positions and will be actually able to logistically send people to the global arena and have a discussion with Western countries.
So, impressions from day one, a lot of thoughts, a lot of talking, a lot of thinking going on in these hours yesterday and today. And to delve right into it, welcome, please, Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Foreign Minister of Germany Annalena Baerbock. Thank you very much for being here, and we'll have a few Q&As going back and forth, but we'll open with a sort of an opening statement from both of your opening remarks framed in a question, and I'll start with you, Minister Baerbock. We talked about the future of democracy, of course. What future do you see? It's a broad question, but to cover the basis for our democracies in this emerging digital world.
Well, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for this very important conference. It's a great pleasure to be sitting here with my colleague, but already in 11 months also friend Tony Blinken at this panel, because we have met in the last 10 months already 10 times as G7 partners, which shows, to answer your question, that obviously the future is not as smooth and easy as we have thought maybe a couple of years ago. However, I would say not despite, but because of the Russian brutal war against Ukraine, the future is only together, because we showed that in this difficult, and with regard to Ukraine, we have to say horrible current situation, we can stand only united. So I believe that we are really standing at a transatlantic momentum, that since February 24th, Germany, Europe and the United States have stood closer together than ever before since the end of the Cold War. And we are firmly united not only in the support of Ukraine and the people and the freedom, but that this transatlantic moment, besides all the horror, comes with great opportunities. Because I've been grown up here in Germany for 40 years of my life, living always in peace. And we had so many debates in Europe, and I know that you have had this also in the US, that everybody took peace just for granted, as if the European peace order just fall from the sky and that it was there, and people were arguing, so actually why do we need the European Union? Why do we need the transatlantic relation? And now we know why. Because the European Union, the transatlantic partnership, the transatlantic friendship is our insurance for life in peace and in a democracy where we can live freely as we want. And therefore, to build an even stronger transatlantic relationship for the 21st century is, I believe, the main task of the two of us as foreign ministers, the main task for our governments and the main task for all our citizens. Because we can address the global challenges only together, but as we are talking about a digitalized world today, we always have to speak also that the European peace order, that the international peace order is not only being attacked by bombs and missiles, but obviously also being attacked by disinformation, fake news, a systematic rival or even war against our democracies, and it has been shaped by attacks with bits and bytes, with bots, and the source of technical power. So yes, the digital revolution has brought us more freedoms to millions of people. We see this as we can see today in Iran, with a brave woman in Iran, that the internet is a source not only of information, but also spreading their fight for freedom around the world. But even in our societies, we can see that the digitalization is also importing for people who do not have access. For example, if we're talking into a total different field, bank accounts. You have some regulation when you can open a bank account. Even in democracies, even in social welfare states, you have to have some certain amount of income. But if you have now a smartphone, you can transfer also money digital-wise without having a bank account. So I think this shows how actually it has brought freedom to us. And I came just back from Uzbekistan, and there was it was a group of pupils from 11th grade, and they were discussing about the positioning of their country with regard to Russia, complaining that in the official media there's so much Russian narrative going on. But they informed themselves, they said, anyhow, only via social media, via Telegram, via Facebook, via Twitter. So we can see that the digital revolution has been also a moment for freedom and for strengthening our democracy. But obviously, this is no news. Everybody knows that the digital world also comes with risk for our security and threatens our freedom. And to answer your question with 3 points, and I was asked for the input to go a bit into detail, I think we have 3 points where we should intensify our cooperations, especially with regard to a digitalized world and the threat to our democracies. First of all, we have to make sure that digital technologies are used for and not against people. And that makes our democracies stronger and not weaker. And this is also a message for democracies in progress or on the road to progress, to underline to governments like in Central Asia of saying, if you try to regulate or ban your internet, this doesn't make your government and definitely not your society stronger, but weaker, because the digital technologies have to be used for the peoples. And the US has put this very prominently in the recent US national security strategy, and we will, as many of you know, write also a national security Germany for the first time in German history, where we take on this point by 3 points. First of all, we address the challenges in the digitalized world, underlining that with regard to using digitalized democracy for the people and not against the people, to have an open and safe cyberspace. In Germany, we have had the attacks in our election in 2016 very heavily. We have had the situation that emergency part of one of our hospitals had to close down because of a cyber attack. You had in the US most recently the largest airports being targeted, and in Montenegro and Albania, while we were at the General Assembly in New York, hackers paralyzed their entire economies. And we see again now in Russia how much this attack on infrastructure is been using as a weapon of war. Europe and the US are responding to threats on all levels. We go after cyber criminals, for example, by blocking cryptocurrency payments, but also, and this is a new momentum in this difficult time of war, we are working on a virtual rapid response teams within NATO to ensure that our infrastructure, which is obviously connected virtually with trains, airports or hospitals, can be better protected with regard to hackers and other attacks. Second, we are fighting intensively with regard to the spread of disinformation. This is also not the big news, but in this critical moment of the last 8 months, we have been showing, I believe, quite successfully what a difference it makes if we are working together. In the beginning of the war, we knew in theory that fake news is a form of instrument of this war method. But then when you remember the situation of the sanctions and the grain, we didn't have it. I have to say we have to be so frank and open also in our debates. When we had G7 meeting back in Schleswig-Holstein, we were faced with situation where suddenly the whole world was speaking about sanctions and that this would be hitting also the prices of food. So obviously, while we were passing the sanction, we didn't think ahead enough of underlining what could be the fake news counterattack by Russia, not fighting the sanctions, but fighting the narrative of the sanction. And so we had to speed up, and I think this G7 meeting, it was so successful because at this meeting we made very clear, because we spoke openly about it, that this is a method of warfare using fake news also as an instrument of war, and that food has been using by Russia as an instrument of war. I was speaking about the war of food. Immediately afterwards, there came the counterattack from the Russians, and this is why I go so much into depth, because it's not only about what we say at G7 meetings, it's a question for all our open society. There was a back attack from the Russians saying how whatever I am, and at this critical moment, there were some headlines in German media just taking over this quota. But in a headline, you don't know what the quota is from. Was it me? Was it Tony Blinken saying, well, this young lady is obviously not well informed? Or if it's the Russian spokesperson. And I think this is very important. I mean, if you're speaking about countering fake narratives, everybody says yes. But in a time of war, what is the responsibility also of the media itself with regard to these fake news? Because obviously, media reports what people are saying. So this is our second point with regard to fighting the spread of disinformation and undermining, obviously, democracies in these kind of times. And also with this point, I think we shouldn't be shy of our strongest tools as democracy. One of our strongest tools is the rule of law. So we should use the rule of law. And this is not to fight freedom, also not in the internet. A regulated platform with rights and rules is something normal in societies, because every freedom has also limits when you counter the freedom or hurt the freedom of another person. So by regulating social media platforms to counter criminal content and hate speech on a regulated normative base and working together in this regard, the EU will do so with the Digital Service Act, and this is also one of the parts where we can work closely together. And my third point is investing in key technologies in the digital age. Obviously, artificial intelligence to quantum computing and semiconductors and 6G, this is the future. And the technology leadership will be crucial for our security. In the EU, we are investing in standard setting and the development of key technologies. With the EU Data Act, with the European Chips Act, we are making sure that new technology work in a way reflecting our values. But obviously, again, the power comes only if we are working together, because in this part, this is not only Russia, but also other players in the world, which go with heavy weight, but also money in this question. Yes, the US and the EU, we are also competitors in the digitalized world. And I think we have to speak openly about this, that we are competitors, but with regard to this crucial key technologies, where we are also in competition with countries worldwide which challenge our democracy, we have to talk about how we can work closer together, bringing together our intelligence. And I think the EU-US Trade and Technology Council will be one of the most powerful instruments if we use it jointly together to join hands across the Atlantic with regard to key technologies. The Council has already led us to coordinate more closely on standards, on supply chains, on export control and investment screening. And now we have to get even closer in daily reality with this regard. I have to say, very frank and open, the work program on this is so ambitious that we cannot do it alone. Definitely not the two of us. Well, obviously, I'm not the most experienced expert on future technologies. I don't know about you, but I tried programming some technology parts in some university. It was better that others were doing it, but also with regard to our governments, with regard to our democracies. We can face this, and I would say, digital attack on our democracies only together. This is not only a job for ministers and politicians, and not only a job for digital companies. We can be successful only if we work together with researchers, with entrepreneurs, with young people who do have an incredible expertise and innovative ideas, and this is also why we are here today, not only with those who come always together at this transatlantic momentum, but with young peoples together. This is why we have the US-German Future Forum, bringing together people closely, listening to your ideas in the film, but also afterwards when you present your proposals with strengthening our democracies, and to show that also you, societies, are standing united together with facing this harsh winter. Because in the end, coming back to where we are standing in November 2022, Putin is bombing Ukraine, not only cities, not only power plants, but infrastructure. We have been just coming out of a bilateral. We have been talking what the winter will mean. It means electricity in the country being blocked at the moment almost 30-40%. But if this keeps going on, children will not only hide under their table because they hear the bomb attacks, but they are endangered of being frozen to death because they don't have any electricity and any heating anymore. And therefore our mandate is so crystal clear. We have to seize this transatlantic moment together. United as democracies, we are stronger than this war, and I think this is actually the most important message we have to send today from this panel. So thank you for this day and the work you did yesterday.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister Baerbock, stressing the importance of the transatlantic relationship in this day and age. Secretary Blinken, I would assume that you concur with a lot of points that Foreign Minister Baerbock made, but the future of democracy in a digital world, does the United States have a different take and a different approach, or how do you see it, and what are your concrete steps that the US is undertaking in achieving that?
Well, first, let me say it's wonderful to be here with each and every one of you. And Ingo, thank you for moderating. I really want to thank Bertelsmann also for supporting this and bringing us together. But it's especially good to be with my colleague and my friend, Annalena. We have been working incredibly closely together, as befits representatives of two countries that are and have to be working even more closely together, precisely if we're going to meet the challenges. I have to say I'm in violent agreement with everything that Annalena said, which is not unusual at all, on the contrary. But let me just put it this way, and I'll add quickly a couple of thoughts that are totally coincident with what Annalena said. We're at an inflection point in history. The post-Cold War era is over. There is a competition on now to shape what comes next. And technology is at the heart of that competition. One way or another, it is going to retool our economies. It's going to reform our militaries. It's going to quite literally reshape our lives, as we know every day from the phones that we carry in the computers that we carry in our pockets. And we know the profound effects that's having on our lives. Germany and the United States together have a very positive, affirmative vision for what that reshaping looks like. It's about finding new ways to cure diseases. It's about using technology to make sure that we can actually deal with climate change. It's about using technology to make sure that we can have our societies and economies powered in ways that don't rely on fossil fuels. It's about making sure that we have sustainable, healthy supplies of food around the world. It's about finding ways to have truly resilient supply chains. And ultimately, it's also about making sure that we have good jobs for our people for the future. And there are challenges inherent in each of those. But as Annalena said, and as you all know, and as you've been talking about not just today, but over many days, we also know that technology can be profoundly misused. And I thought the way that Annalena put it is exactly right. It has to be for people, not used against them. But it is being used against them. It's being used against them in different ways to undermine their privacy, to repress their human rights, to quite literally harass people online, particularly women and minorities, as we see around the world. It's used profoundly for misinformation and disinformation, which is, along with corruption, I think the two most corrosive things of any democracy. And of course, there are profound questions of security that we're responsible for and others are responsible for, where technology can be used for ill, including cyber attacks on infrastructure. The fundamental point that Annalena made that I strongly, strongly agree with is that in order both to capture the upsides of technology, but also to deal with the downsides, there's a number one imperative in working together. No single country, whether it's the United States, whether it's Germany, can actually effectively meet these challenges alone. There's a premium, more than at any time since I've been engaged in these issues, and it's now coming on 30 years, for finding ways to cooperate, to coordinate. And that is no more true than when it comes to technology, when it comes to the digital world we're living in. Annalena talked about the work that we're doing together to try to set standards, to put in place the rules for how technology is used. That is more important than ever. To the extent that values infuse technology, we want to make sure that the values that we stand for together, the United States and Germany, carry the day. And that means doing the hard work, the day in, day out work, being at the table and making sure that we're there in the first place and that we're coordinated in doing so in shaping those rules. It also means together trying to establish a race to the top, not to the bottom, when it comes to the way technology is deployed, the way it's used. And if we're successful in doing that, then those countries that may now be engaged in a race to the bottom will have a choice to make, whether actually to join us in this race to the top or probably over time fail, if we get it right. But all of this starts with the coordination, all of this starts with the work that we do together. And there I have to say, one of the things that I've been most grateful for, the United States has been most grateful for, is this partnership with Germany, and in particular, in my case, the partnership with and the leadership of the German foreign minister. Over the past year, this has been quite extraordinary. We've, as you've heard, met many times through the work of the G7, but also together on a bilateral basis in other groupings that we're a part of. And so much of this is about the leadership that she's bringing to these issues every single day. It's made a huge difference in our ability to tackle these problems. But fundamentally, we have all of these tensions between what we stand for as democracies and how technology fits into that, and either advances our democracies or undermines them. We're each living that every single day. When I was growing up, the thinkers that I was influenced by were many of the classic social thinkers of centuries past, like John Stuart Mill. And the basic concept that John Stuart Mill had was that we're engaged in a marketplace of ideas. And if we have a marketplace that functions properly, the best ideas will compete against each other, and ultimately the best idea will prevail. It's a wonderful vision. It's not the reality that we're living, precisely because technology, when it's misused, is distorting the marketplace. We have to find ways together, and by together, I mean exactly what Annalena said. This is not just between governments. It can't be. Civil society, NGOs, the private sector, academia, all of us actually have to join hands and be on the same team. One of the things that's changed most profoundly in the time that I've been working in government is in the information and digital space. And again, the way we're thinking about this has evolved dramatically. When I started out in government 30 years ago, two things happened every day. The same two things happened every day in the White House where I was working. People would get up in the morning, they would open the front door of their apartment or their house, and they'd pick up a hard copy of the newspaper, in our case, the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. And then, if you had a television in your office, at 6:30 at night, you would turn on the national news. And that was it. That was the common denominator for everyone. Now we've had a vast democratization of information technology, which again, you think is probably for the good, except we know that it's also created an absolute free-for-all, an almost an information jungle, in which sometimes, unfortunately, might makes right. The loudest voices prevail, even if what they're saying is does not reflect reality. None of us are going to be able to get a grip on that problem if we're acting alone. Whether governments can't do it alone, the private sector is unlikely to do it alone. NGOs may have the right ideas, but all of this needs to be brought to bear. So one of the reasons I'm so glad that you're all together, that we're all together, is to see if we can find new ways to work across our different enterprises. That's the only way we're going to get to it. Finally, I'll say this. It's really fitting that we're here, and I thank Annalena for inviting us here to Munster for the G7, but also for this meeting. Of course, the Peace of Westphalia put in place fundamental principles of international relations that are the very principles that are being challenged today by Russia when it comes to Ukraine, and that is the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of nations. If we let that be challenged with impunity, then the foundations of the international order will start to erode and eventually crumble. And none of us can afford to let that happen. The other thing that's striking about this place is it was part of something called the Hanseatic League back in the 14th and 15th century, an effort to literally create trading routes in what is now Germany and throughout Europe, connecting people, connecting products, connecting ideas. And at its best, that's also what the digital world is about. Our challenge is to somehow make sure that it lives up to its best, not its worst. Technology is neither inherently good nor bad. What we make of it is, and that's our challenge together.
Thank you, Secretary Blinken. Both of you actually touched upon a couple of questions I already had and covered it already, so let's go into a little more detail on some of these fields. But you both outlined the perils and the advantages, of course, that technology has, but also the danger, the tools it gives authoritarian governments and regimes, and also the opportunities for fake news that exist. Would you say that there's been a bit of a disenchantment with social media, with digital opportunities, and that if you sum it up, the negatives somehow outweigh the benefits?
Please.
Well, no, my short answer is no. Well, and this counts actually for everything. I think if you're in politics and think the glass is half empty, you shouldn't be there. I mean, then you have given up anyhow. And this counts for me then also for the digitalized world, but I think also the facts are on this side, and not only because I want to believe in a better future. Because yes, obviously, we have the fake news, we have everything we were mentioning, and Tony was outlining perfectly what the challenges are there. But if you look around the world, well, unfortunately, with regard to our sustainable goals, the SDGs from the United Nations, we are not there where we wanted to be. With poverty, we were on a good track, then the Russian war came. But with regard to education, for example, when we travel around the world, thanks God also to other countries, and not only to the countries you know anyhow. When I've been in Niger, for example, the president said, which I didn't hear before from a male president, my most important topic is education and reproductive rights. So because he couldn't counter the explosion of the birth rate, he didn't have so many schools, teachers whatsoever, and he knew that if he cannot handle this kind of situation, the radicalization, the whole security threat, terrorists will just explode. So while he didn't have any school building, while obviously Niger is like on this part of the development track from all countries in the world, even there, the question of digitalization, in those parts where they do have electricities, where they do have digital platforms, he even was speaking about, okay, if I don't have a school building, I don't have teachers, but I have the opportunity of the internet. Then all the situation where the media is oppressed in all these kind of countries. How young people inform themselves. How you give a platform for those who are not being employed in different parts. So I think the opportunities are way bigger than the threats. However, this is the difficult part of the story. As Tony was saying, it's not the best argument which sometimes comes through, but the one who's the loudest person. So we have to join forces to fight the bad side of the digitalization. And if we are getting better in this, because obviously we are not there yet, I think this will give even more chances to all the societies worldwide.
How does that shape your policy making?
No. Well, first, let me say I very much agree. Despite all of these challenges, I remain fundamentally optimistic, including optimistic about technology writ large, but also the digital space more specifically. And I think if you do the balance, I still think it comes out with the glass half full. The progress that we've been able to achieve and actually achieve in people's lives is dramatic. It's easy to take for granted. It's easy to lose sight of, but it's real, and I think it'll continue, including in the social media space, in terms of our ability to connect people, to connect ideas, to connect products. All of that is real. But one of the hallmarks that we know of every major transformation, technological transformation throughout our history, is that there are all sorts of unintended consequences, and they often race forward much more quickly than governments or other regulators of one kind or another are able to capture them.
So the question is, can we be fast enough?
So this is a big part of our challenge. And again, this comes back to the point that we were both making about the imperative of finding ways to work together, not just between governments, but among the different stakeholders, because we don't have, in our case, we often don't have the resident expertise or knowledge. We need to be closely aligned with business, with civil society, with academia. The more we find ways to do that, I think the quicker we'll actually be in managing to deal with, first of all, not only deal with, the whole idea, and Annalena mentioned this, is to get ahead of it. We have to be able to better imagine what the unintended consequences may be, and try to factor that in. I think if you were talking to those who were at the founding, present at the creation of social media, they had an extraordinary vision of all the good and positive that can flow from that. I'm not sure how much time they spent thinking about, but what if? So part of our challenge is actually to imagine what if, and to try to build in some guardrails against that. Now the problem is we're doing that while the plane is flying at 60,000 feet. That's hard.
That's a hard operation. Which leads me actually to a question, to an idea just had. When you recruit future diplomats for the Auswärtige Amt or the State Department, do you actually make that a requirement? A certain tech savviness, or a certain, that you can hit the ground running in this fight?
So I'm happy to start on this because it's something that's actually been
or recruit here in this audience. I mean, I'm sure they're...
Actually, please, there's a table.
Just drop your business card.
So we go, I got to the point when I last served in government in the Obama administration, where I'd be in these rooms that we're so familiar with, without windows, where we're having policy deliberations with our teams. And I became convinced that virtually all of the things we were working on, somewhere as part of the answer, had technology, science, innovation. Maybe not the totality of the answer, but a part of it. And the problem for many of us in these jobs, at least I'll speak for myself, is we're not trained in these disciplines. Most of us come up through the humanities. And as a result, I got to the point where I thought that I needed a scientist or technologist at the table just to tell me whether I needed a scientist or technologist at the table, to understand, this problem may have a solution that's grounded in science and technology. So, fast forward. We're making a major effort right now at the State Department to do just that, to make sure that we have that talent in the department, both in terms of who we recruit, who we bring in to advise us, and how we grow that talent from within the department. We established just a few months ago a new bureau. The bureaus of the founding are basically the building blocks of our entire department. We now have a new bureau for cyberspace and digital policy to make sure that we're able to not only understand but lead around the world in the efforts that we're engaged in together when it comes to how cyberspace is regulated, what digital policy should be, and a big part of that is making sure that we have the people to do it. So the short answer is we want to make sure that everyone is at least basically literate in technology, hopefully fluent, and eventually truly expert.
Ideally, yeah. Do you want to add something? Or otherwise, I would ask you if you have the people that implement those policies, there's also the aspect of the technology that you need. For example, we see what's happening in Iran or in other countries where or Uzbekistan, you mentioned the example, is being limited. What's happening on that field, on that level?
Well, if I may, can I go back to the people? Because, again, here we have to be frank and open. No, we don't have the capabilities, especially with regard to the people. I was talking about birth rate. I mean, if we are looking anyhow with regard to people in the working space, we have big challenges, and then especially in this field. And I think this is something, because we talk about leadership, US, Germany, in many fields. Yes, we do have the leadership. In other fields, at least for my country, I have to say we have to learn from other countries, and this is a great job of foreign ministers. You don't go there, at least this is my understanding, and to preach how great your own country is. I mean, you can say, well, we tried this and it worked quite well, but so many things I've learned. Now also the time of war from Ukraine, I went there to their Ministry of Information, and it has a different name, and I forgot, because when I entered the building, I always asked my team, are you sure we're in the right building? Yeah, because it looked like a startup company. Then we entered a room where the average age was way lower than here, even though we invited here now young people, and we think we are really advanced that we invited young people to a conference. But there, they not only invited but employed people which were, I would guess, 18 years old, directly, obviously, from the street. They were well educated people, but I mean, if I would go to my ministry and even suggest we should employ maybe not only diplomats and not only lawyers, and what Tony was mentioning, we should think also about IT experts. This is kind of a revolution already, because in our bureaucracy, then it's really difficult to say that they don't have to rotate and all these kind of things. But if I would come up and say, you know what, forget about education, university, diploma. I have heard from a great guy in the Chaos Computer Club, and I think he's the best answer to our fake news strategy, while the challenges and feminist foreign policy is an easy path, I would say, if I compare it to this. So without any joke, I think this is what other countries are well in advance, especially those countries now with Ukraine fighting a war of disinformation, but also Baltic states, other countries around the world, where they just jumped over some centuries between the phone and the iPhone, and they are directly now in the digitalized world. And this is really something where we have to work on with people, but also with technologies. And therefore, I would like to take up one of the proposals which we just heard in the video, your proposal of an establishment of an intergovernmental standardization body to ensure the interoperability between public and private software. I wrote it down to don't do any mistakes and have another fake news video somewhere. In the US and Germany, this was a proposal from you, but we, in our national security strategy, which is not published yet, but our first point is to have interoperability between our ministries, in the government, and between the local, federal, and then the European level, because this is already the challenge that we use different software. So now we all know it, so I think we are very quick on this, so we can take this proposal just on board to also have this possibility between the US and the European Union, and this would also answer also your question. We are not there yet, but we know the way how we can go together to join forces again and to understand standard setting. This was a great example I think you were giving. We have learned that obviously through handel Da kommt nicht automatisch Wandel zu Trade. It sounds nicer in the German language. Trade doesn't bring automatically change, so we have learned this now. But you have mentioned, I think, very perfectly also that not only the ideas are there, but we have to also boost standardization. And this is also new thinking, maybe even more for the US than in Germany, because we love regulation. But anyhow, to understand that this is a good thing for democracies, because you can also counter fake news, but also if we are thinking about the aerospace, about a satellite. Yeah, so if we don't have regulated the aerospace in this regard, and if we don't have the standardization, and then it comes also, thanks God, back to diplomats, lawyers in foreign ministries, because drafting these kind of treaties is crucial in the end and will be, I think, the way forward.
Despite Shakespeare, there'll always be room for lawyers.
All right, and there's not much room for questions left, so I would like to actually pitch it to the audience, and we gathered a few questions, and the first one is from Heather Thompson. If you would please stand up and just give it. We don't have a lot of time because we also want to take a picture with all of you, so if you could keep it brief.
Hi, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Heather Thompson. I am an American, but I work in German civil society now for a nonprofit called Democracy Reporting International. My question is about digital foreign policy. I believe it's a vital part of our response to disinformation, digital inclusion, and online human rights. I'm wondering, how can the US and Germany work better together to strengthen our digital foreign policy and combat these threats online? Thank you.
Well, just very quickly, I think one of the things that we both been spending a lot of time on is building the structures, the organizations to do exactly that, precisely because, like you, we've identified this as a critical necessity and a critical challenge. Annalena mentioned something that was established between the United States and the European Union, the Trade and Technology Council. A big part of the work of the Council is exactly what you just described, to actually have an aligned, to the greatest extent possible, approach to digital policy. Annalena said as well, we're competing in ways too. We have to recognize that and also not be shy about that. Competition is good as long as it is pursuant to agreed rules and ideally as long as I said, it's a race to the top, not the bottom. But what we're doing with the TTC is exactly that. We're trying to align our digital policies in a whole variety of ways, particularly when it comes to trying to establish the norms, the rules, the standards by which all sorts of critical technology is used, whether it's AI, whether it's quantum, lots of discussions, of course, about 5G and what comes next, et cetera. So we're doing that. We're also doing that bilaterally between the United States and Germany. There are other fora in which this is done. This is actually an important part of the work of the OECD, increasingly. It's something that I think is being re-energized at a really important time.
Well, just we move ahead to the next question so we can cover a little more. Martin van der Putten has a question.
Good afternoon. My name is Martin van der Putten, and I'm the Director of International Relations of the city of Dortmund, close to Münster. It is a question that touches urban diplomacy, the subnational diplomacy topic. So my question is, how do you intend to involve the city level? I do not mean the civil society, I mean the civil administrations, the city administrations, more systematically in your policy strategies, e.g. the China strategy, the Rebuild Ukraine strategy, and the climate foreign policy strategy. So my request is please use the power of the cities as a strategic tool in foreign policy. Thank you very much.
Let me just say quickly to that, I couldn't agree with you more. One of the things that we've done, I just had the joy of naming someone to be at the State Department, our senior official for subnational relations, because increasingly we found that we're working directly with cities, with municipalities, with regions, not just with our counterparts in national governments. And for a whole variety of reasons that you know very well from what you're doing every single day, cities are often the laboratories where all of these things are playing out. And we get a chance to test out ideas and their application, including with things in the digital space. So that's incredibly powerful. It's also very powerful because at times when national governments, for one reason or another, as we would say colloquially, can't get their act together, it may well be that city, states, regions do. And so that's increasingly vital too.
Would you like to add to that? Or?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for your question, but also thanks for participating in our national security strategy, because this was also for the first time why we're drafting it right now. I did a tour in summer through Germany. Many people ask, so why is the foreign minister doing a tour in Germany? But because obviously security matters are also security matters touching, and we see it again with Ukraine, but touching the daily life. And in many cities, we were just discussing what you've been saying with regard to our infrastructure, with regard to data protection. Well, it doesn't help if we have the great ideas in foreign ministry, but in the town hall of Düsseldorf or Dortmund or somewhere else, even smaller cities, we have the next cyber attack. So therefore, we are integrating now in our national security strategy the cooperation with infrastructure, and now we are discussing here, everybody knows this, about China investment, for example. Again, they are not investing into our ministry in Berlin main town, but they are investing all over the countries. Also the question of cooperation between universities and other countries. So I think this is something which we are already on a good track, but obviously we can intensify it even more. And again, also on the other parts, when we go outside, when I travel to other countries, my credo is always, I don't want to only meet foreign ministers, even though I like many of them a lot, but also go to school classes to hear what the people are saying, and to go to towns. When I was in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I said, okay, I visit Sarajevo, but I would like to have also a meeting with the mayors of 2 other cities, and it was not by coincidence that those mayors were way younger than those partners I met on the federal level, fighting for 30 years already the same fight. The mayors of these 3 towns from different ethnic backgrounds met for the first time, because I said, I can only meet all the 3 of you together. I don't have enough time, so it would be great if you could all come together. Otherwise, I can meet nobody. So this can be also like a small instrument of actually using foreign policy totally different if you go to a different level segment. And again, also giving then power to different people, different age, different gender, different religion. So this is why I would also play the ball back to you, because you're employed by a city. We have had back in time, thanks to the US and other allies after the Second World War, the understanding of partnership from cities and from sports clubs, and we all traveled then to France and somewhere else to have this friendship. I think even in a digitalized world, this is something, again, which we should intensify. As Tony was saying, the cooperation between cities, between region, when we saw in the US that the federal level was withdrawing from the climate talks on the federal level we had between Baden-Württemberg and California, this under 2-degree coalition, and this is something we can build in every policy field. So I would like to invite everybody here, also in the different institution, in the different organization, to intensify the discussion you were just mentioning.
All right, if we keep it brief, because I know you have a tight schedule for the rest of the day, we have room for one more question. Alexandra Swanson, please.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here. My name is Alexandria Swanson, also a U.S. citizen based in Berlin. I work at the Federation of German Industry Digitalization Innovation Department, where I lead an initiative called She Transforms IT. And my question is going back to the topic of a feminist foreign policy. So, Minister Baerbock, you mentioned this briefly at the beginning, and I would be interested to know, so we know that you've implemented this in Germany for the first time. What is that looking like since the implementation? And Secretary Blinken, are there any discussions about implementing this at the U.S. Department of State? Thank you.
You each have a minute.
Well, the strategy is so long, and then people always say, well, she doesn't explain the whole strategy. Well, it's about right resources and representation, and I just stick to the point, resources, representation here, because I think it's always totally underestimated. It doesn't make a difference only if after 150 years you have the first female foreign minister, and Tony suffers under this question, because we had a time at G7, well, there were many elections in between where there was a majority of women. Anyhow, I've been asked
very hard.
A couple of weeks, because he wasn't allowed on the women's picture. Yeah. So But anyhow, a couple of weeks ago, I was asked whether I felt well in this group of men, and I said, well, just look at the picture. This is no group of men, but it's no coincidence that there are two female ambassadors sitting here at the front row. So behind all representation issues on different parts, it is something also which touches our own ministry, where we can make the biggest difference. It's my decision who I send as the most important ambassadors to the most important capitals in the world. I can decide who I send there and who I don't send there. So I think it's many policy fields with regard to rights, Iran, women's rights, with regard to Afghanistan and all these kind of things. But at the end, it comes always back to yourself in your own ministry. And I think there we can do many things. And again, there's room for improvement. So Tony was doing the advertisement for the IT experts. I do the advertisement for female future generation wanting to serve in the Foreign Ministry office. You're more than welcome.
And I can only applaud that and tell you that it's very much part of our focus back home. And actually, I think where we've made the most progress at the State Department in recent years is having the senior ranks with women in leadership roles. That's the case right now, where the Deputy Secretary of State, our representative to the United Nations, are well known to everyone. Our Undersecretary for Political Affairs, who's here with us as well, Toria Nuland, one of the leaders of our foreign policy. But let me just broaden this out very, very quickly. One of the things that I'm engaged in is trying to make sure that we have a State Department that actually reflects the country that we represent. And that, of course, starts with women, but it doesn't end there. One of the challenges that we've had is not having such a department over many, many decades. And I won't go into the details because time doesn't allow it, but I'm determined that we get there and having a truly more representative department. And this is not because it is simply the right thing to do, it's because it's the smart and necessary thing to do. One of the great strengths that the United States brings to anything it does is our diversity, and we're operating, when it comes to foreign policy, by definition, in a diverse world. If we are not bringing everyone to the table in our own department, in our own deliberations, if we're not bringing their different ideas, perspectives, experiences, knowledge to the table, we're shortchanging everything we do. And we're penalizing our ability to act effectively in a diverse world. So, of course, it starts with women, but it also includes all of the groups that are part of our society who need to be represented in and acting on and leading our foreign policy. Otherwise, we're actually not doing a service to our own country.
Iran women, can you say just 2 words on what you guys are doing or talking about to support the women of Iran?
Well, this is also one of the main topics at our G7 meeting. This sounds, well, this is just one of the topics, but this is something special because these kind of G7 meetings are normally having a long time agenda and are targeting the issues with regard to economic development. So this is really a moment saying we bring up a human rights issue, we bring up an issue of democracy and freedom at this G7 meeting to coordinate the different bilateral actions we are doing, because we are running out of time, and German public knows this. I have been publishing last week a new proposal of 4 dimensions how we can support the women of Iran. And it's not only, Tony was mentioning it, it's not only women, it's like the diversity of the Iran society is saying, well, this is enough and we want to live in freedom like many other countries. So this is what we are doing here at G7. Bringing together our support for the people of Iran with regard to sanctions, with regard to giving shelter for those who have high protection, but also with regard to bringing these atrocities to the UN system, to the UN bodies, because this is not automatically there. Again, as democratic states, we need majorities, not only in our own countries, but we need also majorities in UN bodies on human rights violations, and everybody in this room knows, I think, how hard it is. But if it's not the leading democratic economic powers who are ready to also go into this fight saying we don't have a majority automatically in a human rights body, but we fight for it, I think we shouldn't speak about democracies. And this is, again, why I'm so thankful that we are working so close also on the question of supporting the people in Iran.
And only one very quick footnote, also with regard to technology. One of the things that we're trying to do together is to make sure that Iranians have the ability to communicate with each other and with the outside world. And technology is at the heart of that, making sure that there are no barriers to the extent we have anything to say about it, to that technology getting to people who need it and want to use it. That's also part of the work we're doing.
Great closing statements, and I'm happy to announce, Mr. Secretary, that you'll be able to be in this picture that's coming up now. So
very good.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the discussion, for your frank statements. But to include, I would welcome on stage here the coordinator for Transatlantic Cooperation of the Bundestag, a member of Parliament, Bundestag Michael Link. I would also like to invite the two female ambassadors here, Dr. Emily Haber and Dr. Emmy Gutmann, the CEO, our host basically, of the Bertelsmann Stiftung, Dr. Ralph Heck, and the president of AICGS, Mr. Jeff Rathke. Welcome on stage here. And then we'll do this quickly. There is a
How are you?
camera pointing up there. Let's move this over here.
I think we have to
scoot together a little more.
Together, yeah.
Come on in.
There. Little closer.
Yeah, very good. Now look at yeah.
All right, and now wait. We want to give you the opportunity to take a picture with the secretaries and the minister, but that would take too long. So if you would just stand up, turn around, and then we do it selfie style.
There we go.
And unfortunately, those on the sides probably won't be able to make it. So if you squeeze real tight and you want to be in it, come up here.
You can come here.
You know, come here in front. There's plenty of space here on the sides.
Shall we move a bit
And then hopefully we have a wide-angle lens on that camera that catches as many as possible.
Tony.
Good.
So to have a class picture, if you want to come over here. All right, our photographer.
Keep smiling. Great.
All right, let's see how many we caught. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Minister Baerbock, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank
Secretary
you very
Blinken,
much.
as always, a pleasure.
Very good. We're still thanking you for the good cooperation.
All right, but we're not done yet, so please go back to your seats.
See you again.
Thank you.
It's just that. Hey, Hillary. Ah, hat Spaß gemacht. Vielen Dank. All right. The Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister have to leave. I've been told by protocol. I would love to keep you here.
Can we do it together? Thank you. That's fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Great to see you again.
Take care.
Thank you, my friend. Nice to see you.
Have successful talks. Thank you so much. Have a safe trip. Okay.